For 6 weeks, I held a dying woman's hand before I understood that my mother had erased her and was still stealing from her. My name is Rachel Voss Whitaker. I'm 37 years old. I'm a hospice nurse. And the woman in room 14 of Magnolia House Hospice in Savannah, Georgia was not a stranger to me. She was my blood. I just didn't know it yet. Before I tell you how Patricia Voss Callahan walked into that conference room thinking she had won and walked out in handcuffs, tell me in the comments, have you ever looked at someone you loved and realized you were the last to know the truth? Subscribe, because what happened next in room 14 will change the way you think about family. What none of them knew yet, what Patricia had spent 2 years making sure no one would ever know, was that Eleanor Voss Pemberton had already made her own plan. 11 letters, a notarized codicil, a cardboard box left with a neighbor on Gaston Street, and a granddaughter standing in the doorway of room 14 holding a manila intake folder with no idea what she was walking into. I slid the codicil across the oval table. Patricia's eyes dropped to it. Her hands, still resting on the leather portfolio, went flat and still. Her face drained. The room held its breath. Then quietly, with everything she had left, she said, "Your grandmother passed years ago. I don't know who that woman is in that facility." I held her gaze. I did not speak. The APS investigator clicked her pen. Patricia's hands stayed flat on the table. Her gold necklace caught the light. Her face was emptied of warmth for the first time in my memory. The first time in 37 years of watching her perform. Cut to 6 weeks earlier. Eleanor Voss Pemberton, 81 years old. The intake form said no next of kin. She was awake when I came in, white hair against the pillow, an oxygen cannula resting across her cheekbones, the clear tubing looping down toward the monitor beside the bed. Her hands were folded on the blanket, fingers laced, the way someone folds their hands in church. I noticed her nails were clean, filed. Someone had cared for those hands recently, or she had cared for them herself, which told me something about her. "Good afternoon," I said. "I'm Rachel. I'll be your primary nurse." She looked at me for a moment before answering. "Eleanor Voss Pemberton," she said. Formal, Southern cadence, each syllable placed deliberately. "I understand there will be paperwork." "There will," I said, "but none of it needs to happen in the first 5 minutes." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Recognition, maybe, of a certain kind of professional kindness. She closed her eyes again. I moved through the room the way I always did. Oxygen monitor, IV stand, water pitcher on the bedside table. The window faced the garden, such as it was in late October. The roses cut back, the ground going pale. The room was spare, a few personal effects. A cardigan folded over the chair back, and on the bedside table beside the water pitcher a framed photograph. I glanced at it. A woman in a blazer, dark hair, arm around Eleanor, both of them smiling. The woman was younger, maybe late 50s. The background looked like a garden party, somewhere outdoor and formal, summer light. I noted it and moved on. Families brought photographs. That was normal. I opened the folder and started working through the intake pages. Vitals baseline, medication list, respiratory notes from the transferring facility. My pen moved steadily. Eleanor's breathing was shallow but rhythmic, and she had opened her eyes again and was watching the window. "Do you need anything before I finish the paperwork?" I asked. "No," she said. Then, after a pause, "Thank you for asking." I reached the family history sheet. One living daughter, Patricia Ann Voss Callahan, born 1961, Savannah, Georgia. I did not stop writing. My pen kept moving, but something in my chest did something I couldn't name, a tightening, a kind of pressure behind the sternum, like the start of a held breath. I looked at the folder. I looked at the photograph on the bedside table. I looked at the woman on the pillow. My pen had stopped moving. I did not remember stopping it. The intake form listed no next of kin, emergency contact, blank. And yet there was a daughter, and the daughter's name was my mother's name. And the woman in the blazer in the photograph had my mother's jaw, my mother's posture, the same way of holding her shoulders back as though the room owed her its attention. I set the folder on the bedside chair. I picked up the photograph. Eleanor opened her eyes. "You have her eyes, you know," she said, quietly, almost to herself but aimed at me. "I noticed when you came in." I set the frame down. My hands were steady. 12 years of hospice nursing had given me hands that stayed steady when the rest of me could not. But my chest was not steady. My chest had stopped doing anything organized at all. I said, "I'll be back to finish the intake in about 20 minutes. My voice came out level. Professional, I did not know how. I walked to the nurse's station. I pushed through the bathroom door and turned the lock behind me. I pressed my back against the door and held the manila folder against my sternum, my laminated badge digging into my collarbone through the fabric, and I stood there in the fluorescent light above the sink and tried to remember how to breathe. I said the name out loud, quietly to the bathroom tiles, just to hear it exist in a room outside my own head. It didn't help. My birth certificate listed my maternal grandmother as deceased. That was what my mother had always told me. Died before you were old enough to remember. I had accepted that the way you accept weather, not because you verified it, but because no one has ever given you reason to doubt it. Eleanor Voss Pemberton was 81 years old and breathing through an oxygen cannula in room 14. She was not deceased. She had looked at me when I walked through her door and said, "You have her eyes." Not "you seem familiar." Not a polite, confused remark from a woman losing her grip on the present. You have her eyes. Like she had been waiting. Like she had known exactly who I was from the moment I stepped into the light. I turned on the cold tap and held my wrists under it. I needed to go back out there. I had 6 other patients on this ward. I had a job. I turned off the tap, dried my hands, straightened my badge. I opened the bathroom door and went back to work, but something had shifted that I could not shift back. Rachel had no idea, standing in that fluorescent bathroom, that within hours she would be staring at Eleanor's photograph in her own trembling hands, and a name she'd never heard before would arrive in a voicemail that changed everything. I stood in the hallway outside room 14 and listened to the bathroom faucet drip. The nurse's station bathroom had a loose washer in the cold water tap. I had reported it twice. It still dripped. I had been staring at the caulk line between the mirror and the wall for 4 minutes, my phone face up on the edge of the sink, Eleanor Voss Pemberton's family history sheet on the screen, my mother's name, my mother's birth year, my mother's city. I told myself it was a coincidence. I did not believe myself for a single second. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at the woman in the mirror, 37 years old, 12 years in hospice nursing. I had sat with people while they stopped breathing. I had held the hands of strangers at the exact moment they were no longer strangers to anyone. I knew how to stay steady. My hands knew how to stay steady even when everything else was in freefall. I dried my face. I unlocked the bathroom door. I walked back to room 14. My mother raised me in a house in a Savannah suburb with a magnolia tree in the front yard and a framed portrait of her own parents in the upstairs hallway. Both dead before I was born, she told me. Her mother had been a school teacher from Charleston. Her father had been in insurance. She said this the way people say things they expect will never be questioned, with the flatness of established fact, the kind of fact that doesn't need defending because nobody has ever challenged it. I never challenged it. I had no reason to. My mother is not a woman who raises her voice. She doesn't slam doors or throw things. She performs warmth the way other people breathe, without appearing to try, without appearing to cost herself anything at all. I thought that was love. I spent 37 years thinking that was love. There is a difference between a violent person and a polished one. I know that now. At the time, I only knew that my mother had never given me a reason to look too closely. Eleanor was resting when I came back in. Her breathing was shallow but even, the oxygen cannula resting across her cheekbones, her hands folded on the blanket the way hands fold when a person has been still long enough to stop arranging themselves consciously. I sat in the visitor's chair beside the window. Professionally appropriate, I told myself, part of the intake process. Some patients settle better with staff presence in the early days. The framed photograph was on the bedside table, 6 inches from Eleanor's left hand. I looked at it properly this time. I had glanced at it the day before, registered it, filed it, moved on, the way you do when you are trying not to see something. Now I let myself look. 2 women at what appeared to be a garden party, a low stone wall behind them, wisteria on an arbor. The older woman in a cream-colored dress, her white hair pinned up. The younger woman in a blazer, dark hair, a gold necklace catching the light, her arm around the older woman's shoulders, the older woman's hand covering hers. The warmth in Eleanor's face was not performed. I know performed warmth. I grew up studying it. This was real. Eleanor's eyes opened. She looked at the ceiling first, the way people do when they wake in a room that isn't theirs yet, measuring the shape of the light. "You came back," she said. "End of shift check," I said. "How's your breathing?" "The same as it was this morning." She turned her head to look at me. "Where did you train?" "For nursing." "Armstrong State." Then a year at Memorial Health before I came to Magnolia House. She was quiet for a moment. Her oxygen cannula shifted when she exhaled. I read about your graduating class, she said. The Savannah paper ran a photograph. There were 11 of you. My pen stopped moving on the chart. I looked at her. She was looking at the ceiling again. I wrote down her oxygen saturation. I wrote down her respiratory rate. I did not write down what she had just said. I filed it in the same place I had filed everything else, the intake form, the photograph, the name that matched my mother's name exactly. In a part of my mind, I was not ready to open. Get some rest, I said. I'll check in before shift change. She said, you have a careful way about you. And then she closed her eyes. I stood in the hallway and pressed my back against the wall and breathed. The fluorescent light above room 14 hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a call light was blinking. I pushed off the wall and answered it. Because that is what you do. You answer the call light. You keep moving. You do not stand in the hallway of a hospice and let the ground move underneath you. I kept moving. Patricia arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. I heard her before I saw her. Her heels on the linoleum had a particular sound, measured, deliberate, not hurrying and not slow, the sound of a woman who has decided exactly how fast she will walk and would like you to notice the decision. I was standing in the doorway of room 14, medication chart in hand, professional reason for being there established. She came around the corner and I saw the gold necklace first. I have seen that necklace at every Thanksgiving table for as long as I can remember. Large, hammered gold links, a heavy statement piece that my mother wears with every blazer she owns because, she once told me, it fills the neckline so that everything reads as complete. I used to think it was a style choice. I looked at it now, and I felt something cold move through my chest. She did not see me right away. She walked into room 14 with her attention on Eleanor, moved to the bed, touched Eleanor's hand, adjusted the blanket at Eleanor's feet, said, Mama, I'm here. I just wanted to stop in and check on you. In the exact register I have heard at every family dinner my entire life. Warm, present, designed to be heard. She was standing close to the door, and the hallway window framed her perfectly. And I thought, she knows it does. She has positioned herself so that anyone passing can see a devoted daughter at her mother's bedside. Then she turned and saw me. Her expression did not flicker, not once. She smiled, and her voice went half a degree warmer. You must be one of the nurses on this wing. My mother speaks very highly of the staff here. Rachel, I said, I'm one of the primary nurses on this rotation. Wonderful. She said it the way she says wonderful when a restaurant seats us quickly. Conclusive. Moving on. I'm sure you'll do great work here. My mother is particular about her routine, so just reach out if you have any questions about her preferences. I want to make sure the transition is smooth. She said all of this while looking at me with the same expression she used to use at my middle school parent-teacher conferences. Friendly, attentive, already somewhere else. I said, of course. I wrote something on the medication chart that I later could not read. She looked at Eleanor, touched her hand once more, said, I'll be back Thursday, Mama, and walked out, her heels on the linoleum, measured, not hurrying. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. Eleanor said from the bed, without opening her eyes, she means well. She paused. That's what I tell myself. She did not say anything else. I wrote in her chart, patient alert and communicative, emotional status stable. I noted the afternoon visit from next of kin. I did not write what Eleanor had said after the visit. I did not write what I was thinking. There is a line between clinical observation and something else, and I was standing very close to it. That evening, I drove home to my apartment on the other side of Savannah, the one I have lived in for 6 years, the one with the kitchen window that looks out onto a live oak that drops leaves on the sill all autumn. I made tea. I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and told myself I was going to check my email. I opened the Chatham County Public Records portal instead. I told myself I was being paranoid. I typed Eleanor Voss Pemberton into the property records search and told myself the results would be nothing, would be some other woman with the same name, would be a different branch of a family that had no connection to mine, because there had to be a reasonable explanation for all of this, and I was a reasonable person. The first result came back in under 3 seconds. I read it again. I picked up the pen that was lying next to my laptop, a blue ballpoint, the cap already off, and I wrote on the back of an envelope, $1. I stared at what I had written. A house appraised at $1.4 million, transferred to a company with my mother's name on it, for $1 in 2017. My tea went cold in the mug. I did not drink it. I did not know what a durable power of attorney was yet, not in the specific legal sense that would matter later. I did not know the name of the notary who had stamped it. I did not know about the Tybee Island parcel, or the second LLC, or the number $620,000, or the number $214. I did not know about the cardboard box waiting on a kitchen table 3 blocks from that Gaston Street address. I knew almost nothing, but I knew that $1. I thought about Eleanor's voice. Careful, deliberate. I read about your graduating class. I did not sleep well. She called at 8:15 the next morning. I was standing in the Magnolia House parking lot, thermos of black coffee in my hand, keys still in my coat pocket, watching the morning fog sit on the surface of the live oak canopy along the edge of the property. My personal cell rang. I did not recognize the number. I answered. "Good morning," my mother's voice. "The boardroom register, not the family dinner one. I'm trying to reach whoever handles care coordination on the Voss Pemberton wing. I believe my mother is in room 14. My hand tightened around the thermos. She did not know it was me. She had seen my face for 30 seconds in a doorway the afternoon before, and she had not connected Rachel, the hospice nurse, to Rachel, her daughter. I had been wearing my scrubs, my ID badge, my hair pulled back. 25 years of living in the same city as my mother, and she had looked straight at me and seen staff. I said, "This is her care nurse. How can I help you?" "Wonderful." The same conclusive tone. "I just want to make sure the new staff understand my mother's situation. She can be a bit particular. She's used to things done a certain way, and I wouldn't want any misunderstandings about who is responsible for making decisions about her care. I hold her durable power of attorney, so all care decisions come through me. I want that to be clear from the start. I'll make sure that's noted," I said. "Perfect." She paused. "Is she comfortable?" "She slept well," I said. "Her vitals are stable." "Good. That's good." Another pause, and in it I heard something I had heard 1,000 times in my life and never correctly identified. A small, assessing quiet, the kind that isn't thinking about the person on the other end of the line at all. "Thank you so much. I'll be in touch." She hung up. I stood in the parking lot for a long moment. The fog was burning off the live oaks. A crow landed on the chain-link fence at the property edge and looked at me. I took a drink of black coffee and I thought, she did not call to ask how her mother was doing. She called to establish the chain of command. She called to make sure the staff understood where authority lived. I filed that. I filed it alongside the photograph and the intake form and the $1 and the necklace and Eleanor's voice saying she means well. That's what I tell myself. I filed it in the part of my mind that was getting crowded. I went inside and pulled Eleanor's intake folder from the slot outside room 14. I stood at the nurse's station counter and opened it to the family history sheet. I had photographed it the morning before. Now I read every line. I set the folder down. I opened the email app on my phone and found the scan I had made 3 years ago when I was updating my own records for an apartment application. My birth certificate, photographed on my kitchen floor in afternoon light, slightly crooked, the seal slightly blurred but legible. I opened the image and enlarged it. Mother's name, Patricia Ann Voss. The same name, the same birth year, the same city. Patricia Ann Voss became Patricia Ann Voss Callahan when she married my father in 1989. The family history sheet had her married name. My birth certificate had her maiden name. But the details underneath, the year, the city, the cadence of the name itself, lined up with the precision of something that was not coincidence. I was looking at my grandmother's intake form. My grandmother, who my mother had told me was dead. I put my phone in my scrubs pocket. I picked up the intake folder and replaced it in the slot. The charge nurse, whose name I still did not know well enough to rely on, was making notes at the desk 12 feet away. I said, "I'm going to do Eleanor's morning check," and I walked to room 14. Eleanor was awake. She had managed to prop herself up slightly against the pillow, and she was looking at the framed photograph on her bedside table with an expression I could not fully read. Not grief, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The oxygen cannula was in place. Her hands rested on the blanket. The knuckles enlarged with age, the skin papery and thin. "Good morning," I said. I moved to the vitals monitor, checked the numbers, wrote them down. Normal range. Eleanor watched me without speaking. Then she said, "Do you have family in Savannah?" I did not look up from the chart. "I grew up here." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been in Savannah most of my life. You learn its faces eventually." I wrote down her heart rate. My handwriting was steady. I was proud of my handwriting right then in a way that was almost embarrassing. "What does your family do?" she asked. "My mother is in real estate," I said. Eleanor did not respond to that. She looked at the photograph again. The morning light through the frosted glass made the room feel slightly underwater, everything diffuse and slow. "That house in the photograph," she said. 412 Gaston Street. "I've been there 51 years. My husband and I moved in when our daughter was 8 years old." My pen pressed into the chart page. I kept writing. "It's a good house," she said. "Old bones. You have to respect old bones." She exhaled slowly. "Someone should be there to respect them." I finished the chart notes. I said, "I'll let you rest." She said, "You don't have to always go." It was not a complaint. It was a statement of fact, the way she made most of her statements. "I have other patients this morning," I said, "but I'll come back at midday." I did not go directly to my car. I went to the supply closet at the end of the hall and stood in the dark between shelves of saline bags and gauze packages, and I pressed my hands flat against the shelf and breathed. The cold from the metal shelf came through my palms. I stood there for 90 seconds. I counted them. 12 years of this job. 12 years of sitting in rooms where people were telling me the end of their lives, where they were making peace or not making peace with what they were leaving behind. I had thought I understood something about what people carry, what they protect, what they give away only when they have no other choice. I had not known anything. I had been sitting in other people's rooms and missing what was in my own family's story entirely. I straightened up. I smoothed the front of my scrubs. I walked back to the nurse's station and picked up the next chart. The shift ended at 6. I changed out of my scrubs in the locker room, pulled on my wool overcoat, and walked to my car in the Magnolia House parking lot. The evening was cool, the sky going amber at the tree line, the live oaks casting long shadows across the asphalt. I unlocked my car, got in, set my bag on the passenger seat. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel before I started the engine. My phone was in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. 2 text messages from friends I did not have the capacity to answer, a reminder from my bank about a transfer, and a voicemail notification from a number I did not recognize, a Savannah area code, but not one in my contacts. It had come in at 4:47 in the afternoon, while I was with another patient. I pressed play. The voice was a man's, deliberate, a little slow, the way some people speak when they are choosing every word in advance. "My name is Oliver Harrington. I live on Gaston Street in Savannah. I believe we have something to discuss that can't wait much longer. Please call me when you're able." The voicemail ended. The same street as 412 Gaston Street. The same street as the house with old bones that someone should respect. I sat in the parking lot with both hands on the steering wheel and the phone face up on my thigh, and the amber light at the tree line faded to gray, and I did not start the engine yet. I called him back. My thumb found the number before I had decided to. It rang twice. "Oliver Harrington, this is Rachel Voss Whitaker," I said. "You left me a voicemail." A pause. Not hesitation. More like a man setting something down carefully before he picked up something heavier. "I expected you'd call tonight," he said. "I want you to come to the house. When you're ready, but don't wait too long." I asked him how he knew my name. Another pause. "Eleanor gave it to me," he said. 18 months ago, she said, and I am going to quote her exactly because she was very precise about it. She said, "Oliver, when the time comes, you will know her. She'll be the one who finally gets close enough." I sat in that parking lot for another 5 minutes after we hung up. The sky was fully gray now. The live oaks were just shapes. Eleanor had known. 18 months ago, before the hospice, before room 14, before my assignment to her intake folder, she had known that I would eventually get close enough, which meant Patricia had kept us in proximity our entire lives and called it coincidence. I started the engine. I did not go home first. I drove straight to Gaston Street. Oliver Harrington answered the door before I knocked. He was a tall man, 74, with the careful stillness of someone who had spent decades listening more than speaking. He stepped back and let me in without ceremony. The kitchen smelled of coffee and old paper, and on the kitchen table, centered like it had been waiting there for months, because it had, was a cardboard box. He did not explain it immediately. He pulled out a chair for me. He poured 2 cups of coffee I did not ask for. He sat across from me and folded his hands. "Eleanor trusted me to hold that," he said. "She asked me to wait until you were close enough that Patricia couldn't intercept it. I should have found you sooner." He looked at the box, not at me. "I am ashamed that I waited this long." I reached across the table and lifted the lid. 11 envelopes, each one addressed in a careful, formal hand. Rachel. Within those 11 envelopes lay the evidence that would change everything. Transfer records, account balances, a codicil Eleanor had left in Oliver's keeping. And by morning, Rachel would know exactly what Patricia had been hiding and how much it had cost. I pulled over on Pelham Street, 2 blocks from the hospice, because my hands would not stay still on the wheel. Oliver Harrington had picked up on the second ring. I had not told him my name. I had not needed to. "I know who you are," he said. His voice was slow and careful, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment. "Eleanor told me your name 11 years ago. She showed me your photograph, a newspaper clipping, your graduating class." A pause. "I've been waiting for this call longer than I should have." Quick pause. "If you've made it this far, comment the word watermelon below. Then we continue the story." I pressed the phone against my ear and watched a jogger pass on the sidewalk. 2 dogs. A woman in a wool overcoat pushing a stroller. All of it ordinary. All of it completely separate from the world I was standing in. "I'm coming to you," I said. "Tell me the address." He told me it was 412 Gaston Street. I already knew the number. It was on Eleanor's intake form as her prior residence, the property Patricia had transferred for $1 to Voss Callahan Properties LLC in 2017. I had looked up that address so many times in the last 48 hours that I could see it when I closed my eyes. I sat in that car for another minute, then I turned around and drove to Gaston Street instead of the hospice. Oliver Harrington met me at the door. He was 74, broad-shouldered and slightly stooped, with the bearing of someone who had once commanded a room and no longer needed to. His eyes were careful, not unkind, but careful, the way you look at someone you have wronged by waiting too long. "Come in," he said. I made coffee. The kitchen was worn in the good way that old Savannah houses wear down. Linoleum scuffed at the seams, afternoon light coming through a window over the sink in one flat golden sheet. The cardboard box was already on the table. He had not needed to retrieve it. He had known I was coming before I called. I sat down. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of me without asking whether I wanted it. "How long have you known?" I asked. "That she was your grandmother?" He sat across from me, both hands around his cup. "From the beginning. She told me everything when she brought the box. 18 months ago. She walked over here from that house." He nodded toward the wall, toward the direction of the historic house next door, carrying this box under one arm and her oxygen concentrator on a cart behind her. 81 years old. She stood in my doorway and said, "Oliver, I need you to hold this for my granddaughter. She may come looking. Give it to her when she does." I looked at the box. Plain brown cardboard, a strip of tape across the top, my name written on the side in blue ink, in handwriting I was only beginning to recognize as Eleanor's. "She said she had tried to reach you through other channels," Oliver continued. "Letters to your mother's address, phone calls that were never returned. She believed for a while that you genuinely did not want contact. Then she started to understand that you had never received the messages at all." Something tightened in my chest. I held the coffee cup in both hands the way he was holding his. "She came to you," I said. "She made the arrangement. 18 months before she died. 18 months before she was admitted," he said. "She walked herself here. She was frightened that Patricia would find the letters before you did." He set his cup down. "She was right to be frightened. I just wish I had been braver sooner. That's the truth, and you deserve to hear it plainly." He looked at the table. "I am a retired judge. I understood what was in that box. I understood what the codicil meant. I waited because I was afraid of Patricia, and I want you to know that I am ashamed of that. I did not say anything to let him off the hook. I did not say, 'It's fine, it's okay, you did what you could,' because I didn't know yet if that was true." I reached across the table and opened the box. 11 envelopes, each one sealed, each one addressed to me, Rachel Voss Whitaker, in the same steady blue ink as the name on the side of the box. The dates were written in the upper left corner of each envelope, not postmarks, because these had never been mailed, just dates, written by hand. The earliest one was 11 years ago. The most recent was 4 months before Eleanor's hospice admission. I picked up the oldest one. My hands were shaking. I was aware of them, aware that Oliver could see them, and I did not care. The letter was 2 pages, written on cream stationery in a formal Southern hand that looped its capital letters and left wide margins. It was dated the autumn I started nursing school. Eleanor wrote, "I saw a photograph in the Savannah Morning News. A class photograph for Savannah Technical's nursing cohort. Your name was in the caption. I recognized your face before I read the name, which surprised me because I had only ever seen you once, as an infant. And in one photograph your mother left on my kitchen table, the one photograph she did not think to take back. She wrote, I wanted to call you that morning. I sat with the telephone in my hand for a long time, but your mother told me, years earlier, that you wanted no contact with my side of the family, that you had asked her to communicate this to me. I believed her. A pause in the ink, the slightest hesitation visible in the pen stroke. I should have called anyway. I am sorry I believed her. That is the sentence I have rewritten the most times. I set the letter down. I could not speak for a moment. My throat had closed over something solid, something that was not grief exactly, but lived in the same building. Oliver did not fill the silence. He just held his coffee cup and looked out the window. I was grateful for that. When I could breathe again, I reached back into the box. Beneath the 11 envelopes wrapped in a piece of cream stationery folded in thirds was a document. Thicker paper. The notary seal was embossed on the lower right corner. Oliver's signature was there. His full name, Oliver James Harrington, printed beneath a witness line. A second witness I did not recognize, and Eleanor's signature, clear and steady, dated 18 months prior. It was a codicil to Eleanor's original will. You witnessed this, I said. I did, Oliver said. I am a retired circuit court judge. I understand what a valid witness signature means on a testamentary document. I also know what a fraudulent power of attorney looks like when I see one executed in its shadow. He looked at me steadily. That codicil is legally sound. Eleanor was competent when she signed it. I would testify to that under oath. I held the codicil in both hands. The paper was slightly stiff, the way important documents go stiff when they have been waiting a long time. There's something else in the box, Oliver said. Bottom, underneath the letters. I reached in. My fingers touched the edge of a photograph. I pulled it out and turned it over. It was me, infant me, no more than a few weeks old, wrapped in a white blanket, held in the arms of an old woman on a front porch. The porch had a white wooden railing and a pot of ferns. I recognized the railing. It was the railing of this house, Gaston Street, 412 Gaston Street. My own face in a story I had never been told. I put the photograph down on the table. I did not trust myself to hold it any longer. Oliver said very quietly, She came looking for you too. She just got to the wrong door first. I drove to Chatham County Courthouse after that. I told Oliver I would be in touch. I did not know yet whether that was a promise I could keep, but I meant it when I said it. The public records office was on the second floor. Wood paneling, fluorescent overhead, the smell of old paper that every courthouse shares regardless of how many times they repaint. I had been here once before, 2 days ago, when I pulled the Gaston Street transfer record and had to sit down in my car afterward because my hands were shaking. Today, I went back for everything. $1 for a house that the Savannah Historic Trust had valued at $890,000 in its 2018 architectural survey. I photographed every page. Then I pulled the Tybee Island parcel records. The coastal property, a 2-acre lot with shoreline access, had been listed and sold in 2019 through Coastal Heritage Realty. I knew that name. Patricia had mentioned it years ago as her primary brokerage. The sale price was $620,000. I checked the disbursement record. The proceeds had been wired to an LLC account. The account was not Eleanor's personal account. The LLC name on the disbursement line was listed as Voss Coastal Holdings, not Voss Callahan Properties. A different entity, a different account, the same woman. I stood at the records counter and read that disbursement line 3 times. Can I get a certified copy of this page? I asked the clerk behind the counter. The clerk, a man in his 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at the document without comment and said he could have it ready in 10 minutes. I waited by the window that looked out onto Montgomery Street. A live oak out there, enormous, its roots lifting the sidewalk at the edge of the curb. I watched a pigeon land on one of the roots and walk in a small circle and fly away. 10 minutes. I paid for the certified copies with the cash I had in my scrubs pocket. $7 in singles and a 5. I counted it out on the counter like someone who had not been sleeping well. Because I had not been sleeping well. I had thought when I first found the $1 transfer 2 days ago that it might be an error, a bookkeeping shorthand. some legal mechanism I did not understand. I had told myself that because I needed a few hours before I could look at the alternative directly. There was no alternative. This was not a mistake. This was a system. Each piece of it executed separately, through separate entities, across separate years, so that no single transaction looked like what all of them together were. It was methodical. It was patient. It had been built over years, around a woman who was 81 years old and had $214 left in her personal checking account. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. My hands were flat on my thighs. I was watching them, making sure they stayed flat. I drove back to Magnolia House. At the front desk, I stopped and asked about Eleanor's mail. Routine, clinical, nothing in my voice to indicate the reason. The clerk on duty, a young woman I had worked beside for 3 weeks, said Eleanor's mail had been on a forwarding order since week 3. She showed me the instruction form. It was filed in a clear plastic sleeve behind the desk, the kind of administrative document that accumulates without anyone reading it twice. The form was signed in Eleanor's name. "Can I see the original?" I asked. The clerk handed me the sleeve. I held it up to the light. The signature at the bottom, Eleanor Louise Voss Pemberton, looked nothing like the signature on the codicil I had been holding 2 hours earlier. The loops were different. The capital E was different. The way the pen pressed into the paper was different. Eleanor's signature on the codicil was the signature of someone who had written her name with intention, with the deliberate care of a person executing a legal document she had thought hard about. This signature was a copy of a copy, a practiced approximation. Patricia had forged it. Patricia had walked into this hospice 3 weeks into Eleanor's care and filed a mail forwarding instruction in Eleanor's name so that nothing, no legal notice, no statement, no correspondence, could reach Eleanor directly. She had done it at the front desk, in the middle of a business day, with the authority of a durable power of attorney and the confidence of someone who had never been questioned. I photographed the form with my phone. I kept my face steady. I said thank you to the clerk and walked back down the hall toward room 14. I was already past the professional line. I knew that. I told myself I would think about it later. I was not going to think about it later, but I told myself I would, because that was the only way to keep moving down the hall without stopping. Eleanor was awake when I came in for the afternoon care check. The oxygen cannula rested across her cheekbones. The thin October light came through the frosted glass at the same angle it always did at this hour. The framed photograph on her bedside table, Patricia, Eleanor, a garden party, the gold necklace and the blazer, was still there. I had stopped being able to look at that photograph without feeling something go cold in my sternum. I checked Eleanor's chart, took her pulse, checked the cannula fit. All of it routine. All of it a container for what I was actually doing, which was trying to figure out how to say what I needed to say without saying it. "Eleanor," I said, "have you received any correspondence recently? Letters? Anything from outside the facility?" Eleanor looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were clear today, the lucid window narrow but real. "No," she said, "but I stopped expecting letters a long time ago." Her voice was the formal Southern cadence I had come to recognize, measured, unhurried. "There was a box I left with a neighbor. I suppose someone has it by now." She paused. Her eyes stayed on my face. "I hope the right someone." I took her hand to check her pulse again. A care gesture, professional. Eleanor did not let go when I finished. I did not pull away. We stayed like that for a moment. Her hand in mine, thin-skinned, warm, the bones close to the surface. 11 years of letters she had written and sealed and never sent. 4 months ago, she had walked herself next door with a cardboard box because she was afraid, because she knew what Patricia was capable of, because she had been watching from the distance Patricia had imposed between them, watching through newspaper clippings and class photographs, waiting for a door to open. "I'll come back this evening," I said, "for the check at 7. "I'll be here," Eleanor said, the faintest weight on that word. She meant it more ways than one. I drove home at 6 o'clock with the courthouse copies on the passenger seat and Oliver's cardboard box in the back seat, still holding 10 of the 11 letters I had not yet been able to read. On my kitchen table, Oliver had left me a copy of Eleanor's bank authorization. She had designated him as an information recipient 2 years earlier, before her cognitive decline made these arrangements harder to execute. I had asked him for it before I left Gaston Street. He had found it in a folder he kept in the same drawer as his own important documents, next to his judicial retirement papers. I opened the bank statement. Eleanor's personal checking account. Current balance, $214. I read that number 3 times. Then I set the paper down. Then I picked it up and read it again because I needed the number to stop moving. $214. $214. That was what was left. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The laminated ID badge from the hospice was still on my lanyard, still around my neck. I had not taken it off when I came home. I took it off now and set it on the table next to the bank statement. I looked at them both. Then I opened my laptop. I searched the State Bar of Georgia for elder law attorneys in Savannah. I read through 4 profiles before I stopped on one. James Ashford, 54, former public defender, now private elder law practice. His firm's description was plain and direct. No marketing language, no promises. It said he represented clients in cases of elder financial exploitation, contested estates, and fraudulent conveyances. It said he had worked with the Chatham County District Attorney's Office. It said he had 22 years of experience. I read his profile twice. Then I closed the laptop. Then I opened it again and read it a 3rd time. I wrote his office number on the back of the courthouse parking receipt, the one I had gotten at the booth on Montgomery Street, the one with the $7 fee I had paid in singles and a 5. His number in blue pen on the white back of the receipt, next to the exit timestamp, 4:47 p.m. I folded the receipt and put it in the pocket of my scrubs. My phone buzzed on the table. A text, not from the hospice, from a number I knew without having to look at the contact name because it had been in my phone since I was 19 years old. My mother's number, Patricia's number. Haven't heard from you in a while. How's work? Thinking about coming to Savannah soon. Maybe we can have dinner. I stared at that text. A normal text. A loving mother text. The kind of text she had been sending me for years at intervals, between the longer silences. Warm, easy, laced with the plausible deniability of someone who had never needed to try hard to be believed. The courthouse receipt was still in my hand. I did not text her back. I set the phone face down on the table and left it there. The courthouse receipt was still in my hand. James Ashford's number in blue pen, the exit timestamp at 4:47 p.m. I smoothed the fold with my thumbnail until the crease went white. There was a thing I needed to decide, not tomorrow. Right now at this table, with Eleanor's bank statement and my badge sitting side by side and my mother's text glowing somewhere under my palm, I could call Patricia back. I could say, sure, dinner sounds nice, I've been busy, work is fine. I had done it before. I was good at it. 12 years of hospice nursing had taught me how to hold a face steady while something underneath it broke clean in half. I knew how to perform normal. I had been performing it my entire life without knowing there was a reason. Or I could call the number on the receipt. I picked up the phone, not to answer Patricia. I turned it over, opened a new contact, and typed the 7 digits from the receipt into the field. James Ashford, elder law. I did not call that night. It was too late. His office would be closed, but I saved the number. That was the line. The moment I saved that number, I was no longer a nurse who had stumbled into an uncomfortable coincidence. I was something else. I was a woman who had found the evidence and was deciding what to do with it. I left the bank statement on the table. I left my badge. I picked up the first of Eleanor's 11 envelopes, the one with the lowest number penciled in the corner in Oliver Harrington's careful hand, and I carried it to the window. The street outside was quiet. Dark live oaks over the sidewalk, the amber of the street lamp catching the Spanish moss. I slid the letter out. Eleanor's handwriting. Formal, deliberate, the cursive of a woman who had learned penmanship as a discipline. Rachel, it began. By the time you read this, you will already know more than I was ever allowed to tell you. I am sorry it had to come to you this way. I watched you from the only distance she permitted. You deserved better than distance. I stood at the window for a long time. Then I went to bed. Tomorrow I would call James Ashford. Tomorrow I would begin. By morning, that saved number would become the first domino, and within 48 hours, Eleanor's careful handwriting and a backdated signature would be spread across a conference table, while Patricia's face went very still. And that's how she ended up there, sitting across from me in that conference room, her gold necklace catching the fluorescent light, expecting to finalize a transfer, and instead finding a table that had been waiting for her for a long time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to 7 o'clock that morning, when I was sitting at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand and Eleanor's first letter face down on the wood in front of me, because I couldn't look at it anymore and I couldn't put it away. I had not slept. Not even an hour. I called James Ashford at exactly 7 a.m. Silence. 4 seconds of it. Then James Ashford said, "How much do you have documented?" "Everything," I said. "Property records, bank records, a forged mail forwarding signature, a notarized codicil my grandmother left with a neighbor, the intake paperwork that proves my mother listed her as having no next of kin while simultaneously holding a POA over her entire life." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Bring me everything you have. Come now. Don't call your mother." I was already standing up. His office was on the second floor of a building on Bull Street. One window looking out over a live oak canopy that was dropping its leaves in the October wind. The room smelled like old paper and the cold dregs of morning coffee. Case files were stacked on every flat surface. His reading glasses were pushed up on his forehead the moment I walked in, and they stayed there the entire time I talked. Ashford did not speak while I laid things out. He read each page. He turned the photographs on his phone screen, zooming in on signatures and dates. He set things aside in a sequence that told me he was sorting by legal weight, not by the order I'd handed them over. I sat across from his desk and watched him, and tried to keep my breathing even. He picked up the durable power of attorney document last. He read it once. Then he read it again, slowly, his finger moving to the notary stamp in the lower right corner. He set it down. He took his reading glasses off his forehead and put them on properly, which was the first time I'd seen him do that. He picked the document up again. "When was Eleanor's cognitive decline diagnosis officially recorded?" he asked. "I don't have her medical records," I said. "I'm her nurse, not her physician. But from the care notes, the first mild dementia notation was made by her primary care physician before the formal diagnosis was filed. I can get the exact date." "You won't need to," he said. "I can get it through the APS referral." He set the POA down on the desk and looked at me over his glasses. "The notary stamp on this document is dated 11 days before the official diagnosis was recorded. Do you understand what that means?" "Tell me," I said, because I wanted to hear him say it in plain language. I wanted it to be real outside of my own head. For a durable power of attorney to be legally valid, the person granting it has to have legal capacity at the time of signing, he said. If Eleanor's physician had already documented early cognitive impairment, even informally, even in a care note, during the window when this POA was notarized, then the signing happened while her capacity was already in question. It doesn't automatically void the document, but it gives us a strong predicate that the POA was executed under circumstances that should have been reviewed and weren't. And if Patricia Voss Callahan or the notary knew about that cognitive impairment at the time of signing, he stopped. He tapped the notary stamp with one finger. This isn't just a civil fraud case anymore. This is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Georgia statute. And if those LLC transfers crossed state lines, we're looking at wire fraud on top of it. My chest locked. My hands were flat on my thighs under the desk. I said, "What do I need to do?" "You've already done most of it," he said. "You retained me the moment you walked through that door. Now I file the APS complaint. That's not reversible, Rachel. Once I make that call, there is no taking it back." "I know," I said. He looked at me for a moment, not testing me, just making sure. Then he reached for his phone. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, just a man picking up a phone to make a call that I had asked him to make, and me sitting across from him knowing that whatever came next, I had chosen it. My work phone buzzed on the edge of his desk where I'd set it. It was a message from Magnolia House's charge nurse. Patricia Voss Callahan had arrived at the facility with transfer paperwork. The administrator was reviewing the authorization. The paperwork was signed under the durable power of attorney. I read the message twice. Then I held the phone across the desk so Ashford could see it. He read it. He was already pulling his own phone out. "How fast can you get back there?" I was already standing. The drive back to Magnolia House took 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard the entire time. Not because I needed to, but because it gave me something concrete to count. 11 minutes. 48 hours. Those were the numbers I kept coming back to. 48 hours to stop a transfer that would scatter the evidence and remove Eleanor from my reach. 48 hours before whatever legal motion Ashford's APS contact could arrange would either hold or fall apart. I did not think about my mother the whole drive. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about the oxygen cannula resting across her cheekbones in room 14. I thought about the way her hand had found my wrist in the half-lit room, the grip stronger than her frame suggested. the grip of a woman who had been waiting a very long time and was not willing to let go yet. I thought about what it would mean to walk back into that building as something other than Eleanor's nurse. I had been a hospice nurse for 12 years. I had learned how to be present with people in the worst hours of their lives without fusing to their pain. I had learned where the line was between care and collapse. I had spent 12 years on one side of that line. I parked in the staff lot. I sat in the car for 90 seconds. I counted them. Then I clipped my laminated ID badge back onto my lanyard, the way I did every morning, and I went inside. I went to room 14 first. Eleanor was awake. The morning light came through the frosted glass in thin, flat strips across the floor. She was propped slightly upright, her hands folded on the blanket, the oxygen cannula in place. She looked at me when I came through the door. I moved to the side of her bed. I leaned in close, the way I would for any patient, close enough to speak quietly without projecting into the hall. I said, "I found the box. I found everything in it." Eleanor closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a long moment. When she opened them, they were wet at the corners. She said, "I hoped it would be you. I was so afraid it would be too late." "It's not too late," I said. "Not yet." Her hand came up from the blanket and found my wrist, the same grip as before. She held on. I gave her 30 seconds. Then I said, "I have to go handle something. I'll be back." She nodded, just barely. She released my wrist. I went to find the charge nurse. I said to the charge nurse, "The authorization on this transfer may be under active legal challenge as of this morning. I'm asking that no action be taken for 48 hours. I said it the way I say things in a medical emergency. Not a question, not a plea, just a statement of what needs to happen. 48 hours. That's all. The charge nurse looked at the paperwork. She looked at me. She said, "Rachel, this is above my—" "I know," I said. "I know it's above your authority. I'm not asking you to deny it. I'm asking you to wait. 48 hours. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word sunflower below. Then we continue the story." She looked at me for a long moment. Something shifted in her face. She said, "I'll tell the administrator it needs a second review." "Thank you," I said. "Not yet," I said. "Keep it that way," he said. "Don't engage with her directly. Don't let her know what you have. If she approaches you, you're Eleanor's nurse. That's all you are until tomorrow morning." I said, "Understood," and I meant it. But my hands were gripping the phone tighter than they needed to be, and the hallway felt very narrow. And somewhere in the building, my mother was standing in front of an administrator's desk, trying to move an 81-year-old woman with $214 in her bank account to a cheaper facility so she could close out her financial exposure before Eleanor died. I went back to my station. I did my work. I checked on my other patients. I documented Eleanor's morning vitals. I did everything I was supposed to do, and I did it competently because 12 years of emotional discipline does not disappear overnight. But underneath all of it, my sternum ached the way it does when you've been bracing against something for a long time and you finally know you're going to have to stop bracing and start moving. Ashford called back 40 minutes later. "That's what the county records showed," I said. I sat down. I was in the nurse's station and I sat down in the rolling chair and put one hand flat on the desk and stared at the wall calendar above the medication log. "She built a second shell," I said. I thought about Eleanor's bank account. $214. I thought about the handwriting on 11 envelopes addressed to me, 11 years of letters that never arrived, intercepted or blocked by the same woman who had been systematically draining Eleanor's accounts while performing concerned daughter devotion at her bedside for the staff to witness. "What does that do to the case?" I asked. "It adds exposure," Ashford said. "Wire fraud if the LLC registrations crossed state lines. The APS complaint was already enough for elder exploitation under state code. This makes the federal layer real." I said, "Okay." He said, "Hold steady. Tomorrow morning." That was what Patricia's devotion looked like when there was no staff to perform it for. Eleanor was awake when I came in. I pulled the chair close to her bed, the way I had a dozen times over the past weeks. Only this time I didn't have a clipboard, and I didn't have a professional question to ask her. I sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then I said, "I didn't know you existed. She told me you were dead. She told me that before I was old enough to ask follow-up questions, and by the time I was old enough, I had stopped thinking about it." Eleanor looked at me. Her eyes were clear. In the evenings, she was often clearest. The confusion that came with the early hours lifted by afternoon, and for a window of 2 or 3 hours, she was precise and present and entirely herself. This was one of those windows. She said, I know. I tried to find a way through for a long time. I wrote letters. I called numbers that were disconnected by the time I called them. After a while, I started leaving things with Oliver. I didn't know what else to do. She paused. I thought if I could just get the letters to you, you could decide what you wanted. I didn't want to force anything. I just wanted you to know I hadn't chosen this. I know, I said. Do you? She said, not sharply, just asking. Yes, I said. I read the first one, the one from when I started nursing school. She smiled. It was a small smile, tired at the edges. You were in the paper, your graduating class. I cut it out. I still have it somewhere, or I did. I suppose I don't have much of anything now, but I had it. She looked at the frosted glass. I used to sit with that clipping and think about what it meant that you'd become a nurse. Whether that said something about who you were, whether you were someone who needed to care for people or someone who needed to be needed. I decided it was both. I thought, if you're both of those things, you'll be good at it and it'll cost you. My throat tightened. I said, it costs. Yes. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for more of it, she said. We sat with that for a while. There was no accusation in her voice. There was no performance of grief for my benefit. There was just an 81-year-old woman, oxygen cannula resting on her cheekbones, telling me the truth about what the last 11 years had been, and I sat in the chair beside her bed and let it land. Of course she did. She thought she was coming to finalize a transfer. She thought she was one signature away from completing the last administrative step of a plan she had been building since 2016. She thought Eleanor's nurse had called the meeting. She had no idea who had actually called it. I arrived 20 minutes early. I set the codicil on the table. I set the property transfer documentation beside it. I set the photograph of Eleanor's bank account showing $214 beside that. I straightened the stack the way I straighten a medication tray, precisely, deliberately, without rushing. We sat down. We waited. Patricia's hands went flat on the table when she saw us. The portfolio she carried, the brass clasp clicking as she set it down, stayed closed. She did not open it. She looked at each face in turn, the way someone does when they are running a fast calculation about how much each person in the room actually knows. She landed on me last. Her expression was not the one she wore for the administrator or the charge nurse. It was the one she kept for situations she had not fully anticipated, controlled still, already working backward to find the angle. Then she arranged her face into something almost maternal. I'm not sure I understand the purpose of this meeting, she said. Her voice was warm. It was always warm. That was the thing about Patricia Voss Callahan. The warmth was not fake, exactly. It was real warmth deployed as a tool, warmth with a purpose, warmth that she had spent 62 years learning to calibrate for maximum effect. Ashford said, "We appreciate you coming in, Ms. Voss Callahan. We have some matters to discuss regarding your mother's care and her estate documentation." Patricia looked at the codicil on the table. She looked at the property records beside it. She looked at the photograph of Eleanor's bank balance. Her face did not change, but something behind it did. I saw it in the stillness that moved across her jaw, the way her eyes stopped moving and just fixed. She said, "I don't know what she's told you." She looked at me when she said it. "My mother has dementia. Whatever she signed, whatever she said to you or to some neighbor, she wasn't competent. She hasn't been competent for years." She looked around the table. "I've dedicated the last several years to protecting her, keeping her comfortable, making her care decisions, managing her affairs when she couldn't. This is a dying woman being used by a disgruntled employee who has developed an inappropriate personal attachment to her patient." The room was quiet. The APS investigator's pen was uncapped, but she wasn't writing yet. Detective Reeves Sinclair had not moved. Ashford reached into his legal folder. He set the POA backdating analysis on the table. 4 pages, paper-clipped, the key dates underlined in blue ink. He slid it toward Patricia. Patricia looked at the analysis. She did not pick it up. She said, "My mother understood what she was signing. The notary who stamped this document," Ashford said, "will be referred to the Georgia Notary Licensing Board for review. I've already made that referral this morning." Patricia's jaw shifted, just barely. She said, "I want to call my attorney." Ashford said, "That is absolutely your right." He gestured toward the door. Nobody moved to give her privacy. Nobody stood. Nobody offered her space to step out. Patricia looked at the door. She looked at Reeves Sinclair. She did not stand up. The color left Patricia's face. Not slowly, not dramatically. It just went, the way heat leaves a room when a window opens. Her hands, already flat on the table, did not move. Her gold necklace caught the fluorescent overhead light as she sat very still. She said nothing. The conference room was very quiet. The fluorescent light hummed above us. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear a cart moving, a wheel that needed oil, the ordinary sound of a hospice morning continuing its work. Ashford said, "Ms. Voss Callahan, you have 30 seconds to call your own attorney before the investigator reads you your rights." Patricia's eyes moved to the codicil. She read the top line. She read the name on it. I picked it up. I had not planned to read from it. I had planned to let Ashford present it, let it speak through legal language, let the notary seal do the work. But I looked at Patricia's face, the calculations still running behind her eyes, the warmth entirely gone now, her silence not contrition but strategy, and I picked up the codicil and I read aloud the clause Eleanor had written in her own hand. To my granddaughter Rachel, whom I was not permitted to love openly, I leave everything that remains mine to give. Patricia Voss Callahan said nothing. I had heard my mother's voice my entire life. She had a voice that filled rooms, that smoothed over disagreements, that offered explanations that sounded like facts, and managed every conversation toward the outcome she wanted. I had never, in 37 years, heard her say nothing. Not when she was cornered. Not when she was challenged. Not when I had come to her with questions she didn't want to answer. She always had a next move. She had no next move. Her silence was not remorse. I want to be clear about that. It was not guilt landing and finding its expression. It was calculation, pure, unencumbered, running fast through options and finding each one closed. She was sitting in that silence the way you sit in a car after you've driven off a road in the dark and the car is still, trying to figure out how bad the damage is. The APS investigator said, "Ms. Voss Callahan, you are not free to leave." Patricia did not stand up. She did not argue. She looked at me, and something in that look I recognized from childhood. From every moment I had brought her something she did not want to deal with. The look that said, "This is a problem you have created, and I am going to wait for you to understand that." I held her gaze. My hands were steady on the table. My laminated ID badge hung on its lanyard against my chest. I was 37 years old, and I was Eleanor's nurse, and I was Eleanor's granddaughter, and I had been both of those things from the first morning I walked into room 14 with a manila intake folder, whether I knew it or not. I did not look away. The conference room took 30 more minutes to process. Forms signed, rights explained, Patricia's attorney reached by phone and on his way. I left before he arrived. I had said everything I needed to say in that room, and everything else belonged to Ashford and Reeves Sinclair and the machinery that had started moving and would not stop on its own now. I went back to room 14. Eleanor was awake. The October light through the frosted glass was the same thin, flat light I had first seen on the morning I came through that door with a manila folder and no idea what I was walking into. The oxygen cannula rested across her cheekbones. Her hands were folded on the blanket. She looked at me when I came in. I did not explain what had happened in the conference room. She was 81 years old, and she had been carrying this for 11 years, and she had spent whatever strength she had left on getting the box to Oliver and waiting for me to find it. She did not need a debrief. She needed someone to sit down. I sat down. I took her hand. She said, "Is it done?" I said, "It started." She closed her eyes. Some of the tension I had been watching in her face for 6 weeks, the particular tension of a person waiting for something they are not sure will come in time, released, just slightly, not gone, but lighter. We sat together in the thin October light, her hand in mine, the oxygen cannula doing its quiet work, the hallway outside murmuring with the ordinary sounds of the place. Then the charge nurse appeared in the doorway of room 14. She looked at me, and her face held the particular expression of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. She said quietly, "Ms. Voss Callahan's attorney has been in touch. They're filing a motion first thing in the morning. Something about testamentary capacity. That quiet Rachel would wake into tomorrow morning. The quiet of something already set in motion would be nothing like the silence of the 11 days still ahead of her." The morning after the confrontation, I woke at 5:15. My alarm was set for 6. I lay there in the dark of my apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling above my bed, and I tried to name what was in the room with me. It wasn't peace. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't the clean, open quiet of a thing resolved. It was something closer to the silence after a door closes, the kind of silence that tells you the closing was real, that it happened, that you cannot step back through. For the past 6 weeks, I had been carrying a pressure behind my sternum every time I walked into Magnolia House, a held breath, a calculation running constantly in the background. Now the calculation had changed. The machine was in motion. That was different from over, but it was different from before. My phone rang at 6:45. James Ashford didn't bother with good morning. "A PS complaint is filed and accepted," he said. "The Tybee Island account freeze is confirmed as of yesterday afternoon. Detective Reeves Sinclair's office is coordinating with the DA, and Patricia has retained a defense attorney, David Mercer, downtown Savannah, white-collar practice." "Does that change anything?" I asked. "It slows the timeline," he said. "She's not in handcuffs yet. This takes time, but the machine is moving. That's what matters." I pulled the sheet up to my chin. "Eleanor's transfer. Tell me about the transfer." "Blocked," Ashford said. "Pending investigation. Eleanor stays in room 14. His reading glasses clinked against something on his desk. "Go see her, Rachel. That's the part I can't do for you." She was awake. The oxygen cannula sat across her cheekbones the way it always did. Her hands were folded on the blanket. She looked at me, and she did not say good morning. She said, "Well?" Eleanor listened without moving. When I finished, she was still for a long moment. Then she said, "I want you to read the letters. Not later. Now. I want to know you've read them while I can still hear about it." Around the 4th letter, I laughed. Eleanor had written 2 full paragraphs about a tabby cat that lived in the overgrown garden at 412 Gaston Street. A cat with, she said, the same disdainful opinion of foot traffic as a particular Savannah City councilman she declined to name. Eleanor didn't turn her head, but she smiled. A small, contained smile, the kind that has been practicing restraint for so long it can't fully let go. Those 11 days are hard to describe without making them sound like more than they were, or less. In the mornings, I did my rounds. Professional, measured. Eleanor called me Nurse Voss Whitaker and asked about her medications with the formal Southern cadence she used for all official exchanges. In the afternoons, we dropped that. I would pull the visitor's chair close and we would talk, or I would read, or we would simply sit in the October light while a slow rain pressed against the frosted glass. On the 5th day, I mentioned the photograph, the one from the box, infant me, on the front porch of the Gaston Street house. "You had your father's coloring," Eleanor said, "but you held your head the way I do. I saw it from across the room on your first day." I didn't ask about my father. That question was there, sitting between us like a third chair. Eleanor glanced at it. I glanced at it. Neither of us reached for it. That is allowed. Some conversations need to wait for a different kind of readiness, and some of them never come, and both of those things are true at the same time, and neither of them is a failure. On the 7th evening, Eleanor asked me to describe the Gaston Street house to her. Not tell her, describe it, as though she needed someone else's eyes. "I've only seen it from Oliver's kitchen window," I said. "That's enough. Tell me what you saw." I told her about the garden, overgrown and gone to ivy and late-season weeds. The antebellum bones of the facade still solid under the peeling paint, the columns still plumb despite everything. The porch light on, Eleanor said. "I set a timer on it. I didn't want the house to look abandoned." Some things you do not say out loud because saying them would make them too small. "I was afraid your mother would answer," she wrote. "And I was more afraid you would answer and not know my name." I sat with that sentence for the full length of my break, 15 minutes. Then I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and went back to work. On the 10th day, my phone rang as I was walking to my car after my shift. James Ashford. His voice was even, the way it always was, but the particular quality of his pauses was different, shorter, tighter. I stopped walking. The parking lot was quiet. A slow rain had started and the drops were catching on the hood of my car. I could hear Ashford breathing on the other end of the line, giving me time. "Oliver witnessed the signing," I said. "I know, and I have Oliver's statement, but they're going to argue Eleanor's competency was compromised at the time of execution. They'll pull her medical records. They'll find every notation a doctor ever made about her cognition." I stared at the rain on the windshield. "What do we do?" "We fight it," Ashford said. His voice had a new edge now. "But Rachel, I need Oliver Harrington in front of a judge. I need him willing to testify. And I need to know if Eleanor's lucid windows are still open, because I may need a recorded statement from her directly." My hand tightened around the phone. Eleanor had 11 days. I had already used 10 of them. The motion would arrive in her inbox before dawn, and every word Ashford had chosen would feel like a blade pressed against Eleanor's last 11 days. Patricia's attorney's name was listed at the top of the motion filing as Bernard Holt of Holt and Associates, Savannah, Georgia. I read it 3 times before the words stopped swimming. The motion argued that Eleanor Voss Pemberton was in an advanced state of cognitive decline at the time the codicil was signed, 18 months prior to her hospice admission. It argued that Oliver Harrington, as a witness with a stated personal relationship to the signatory, could not be considered a disinterested party. And then it said the thing that made me set the phone face down on the break room table and stare at the ceiling. It said that Rachel Voss Whitaker, as Eleanor's hospice nurse, had used a position of professional trust to locate and influence a vulnerable patient for the purpose of personal financial gain. I used Eleanor. That was the story Patricia's team was now telling, that I had cultivated a dying woman, that I had found a lonely patient and positioned myself beside her and walked away with her estate. I sat with that for a full minute. Then I picked the phone back up. I can request them through the Hospice Medical Records Office, I said. Continuity of care file. It's within my scope as her nurse of record. Do it this morning, he said, and hung up. I did it this morning. I had barely walked back from the medical records office when the Magnolia House director called me into her office. Her name was on the door in raised brass letters. She did not invite me to sit. My hands were still. My voice was steady. 12 years of standing at bedsides had given me that much. Eleanor Voss Pemberton is my grandmother, I said. I did not know that when I was assigned to her care. I know it now, and I have an elder law attorney and a Chatham County financial crimes detective who can explain what has happened to her estate. The director looked at me for a long moment. The overhead light hummed. Outside her window, the Savannah November sat gray and still. I can't remove you from her care right now, she said. Not with what you've just told me, but I need you to understand that this is delicate. I understand, I said. What I understood was that Patricia had just tried to take Eleanor away from me using the same instrument she had used on everything else. Administrative authority, a letterhead, a phone call to someone with the power to sign a form. It hadn't worked yet, but she would try again. James Ashford called back 50 minutes later. Wire fraud? I said. The LLC to LLC transfer cleared through a Charleston, South Carolina bank. That crosses a state line. That's a federal wire fraud hook on top of the state elder exploitation charge. Patricia's attorney knows this. That motion to invalidate the codicil is not just about the inheritance. It is about creating enough legal noise to delay the criminal timeline while she negotiates a position. I leaned against the wall of the nurse's station, the chipped baseboard pressed against my shoulder blade. And the account balance, Ashford said. Eleanor's personal checking account, the $214 remaining. Detective Reeves Sinclair is entering that into the criminal record as evidence of systematic financial stripping. $214. That number is going to matter in a courtroom. I wrote it down again on the back of a supply requisition form. I already had it memorized. I had memorized it the first time I saw it, sitting in my car outside the Chatham County Courthouse with shaking hands. But I wrote it down again, because $214 was what was left of an 81-year-old woman's life savings after her daughter had moved through her estate like a slow and patient fire. Some numbers need to be written down more than once. We met with Oliver Harrington at Ashford's office that afternoon. Oliver wore a wool overcoat and sat with his hands flat on the table, reading the motion language Ashford had printed out. He read it slowly. He read it all the way through. "They're calling me a biased witness," he said. "They are," Ashford said. Oliver set the paper down. "I was a judge in this county for 22 years, he said. "I know what a valid notarization requires. I know what testamentary capacity looks like in a person. Eleanor knew exactly what she was signing. She walked me through every clause. She asked me to read back the inheritance language twice so she could confirm the wording was precise." His jaw was set. She was not a woman in the grip of dementia. She was a woman who was afraid and thorough. "I need that in a signed declaration," Ashford said. "Submitted to the court by Thursday morning." Oliver looked at his hands. "I should have acted sooner," he said. "When she first brought me that box. When she first told me what Patricia had done." He looked up. "I can at least do this." The physician's notes came through from the hospice medical records office at 4 that afternoon. Eleanor's treating physician, 18 months prior, had written the following: patient demonstrates intact judgment, clear long-term recall, and expressed concern for the security of her personal affairs. No restriction on legal decision-making capacity at this time. That was the medical record Patricia's attorney was claiming did not exist. I forwarded the file to Ashford at 4:22 p.m. He replied in under 3 minutes. This closes their argument on capacity. They'll know that by tomorrow morning. I went back to room 14 at the end of my shift. Eleanor was sleeping. The oxygen cannula rested across her cheekbones. Her hands were folded over the blanket. I pulled the chair close and sat. I stayed until visiting hours ended. Then I drove home and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and did not sleep. The overnight nurse called at 4 a.m. Eleanor had entered a new phase. She was not in distress, but the lucid windows, the ones where she had looked at me and said, "You have her eyes," the ones where she had told me she hoped the right someone found the box. Those windows were closing. I sat beside her. The oxygen monitor kept its patient rhythm. The thin light through the frosted glass held no color yet. I held her hand. It was warm and small and still. At 5 a.m., my phone lit up on the bedside table. A text from James Ashford. Court hearing on the invalidation motion, Monday morning, Chatham County Courthouse. Oliver and I will be there. You need to be there. This is the last gate. The courthouse steps on Monday morning would demand more than testimony. They would demand she speak the words Eleanor had preserved for her, in front of the one person who had spent 11 years making sure no one would listen. Monday morning, 4 days after Eleanor's condition changed. That's how we ended up back in that conference room. But first, we had to get through a courthouse. James Ashford was waiting for me on the courthouse steps when I arrived. His reading glasses were pushed up on his forehead. He had a brown leather satchel in his left hand and a styrofoam cup of his own coffee in his right. And he looked the way he always looked, deliberate, steady, like a man who had been through rooms like this enough times to know what they cost and had decided to come anyway. Oliver Harrington was standing beside him. Oliver was in a jacket and a dark tie. He had pressed the jacket. I could see the crease at the collar. He was 74 years old, and he had spent more than 2 decades as a circuit court judge in this county, and standing on those courthouse steps, he looked like every year of it. He looked like a man returning to a place he understood, not with comfort, exactly, but with the kind of knowledge that cannot be faked. "Good morning," he said. I nodded. I couldn't say much yet. My throat was tight. "She would want us here," Oliver said. He was not speaking about the judge. "What does that mean for us?" "It means Oliver testifies," Ashford said, "and we let the physician's notes do the rest." We went inside. The hearing room was smaller than I had expected. A single judge's bench at the front, 2 counsel tables, a gallery with 6 rows of wooden chairs. Patricia was already seated in the gallery when we entered. She had her attorney beside her, a man in a charcoal suit with a silver tie clip, and she was looking straight ahead. Her gold necklace was in place. Her blazer was buttoned. When I walked in, she turned her head, looked at me for exactly 1 second, and then looked away. He said it well. He said it without flinching. I sat at the counsel table and watched him say it, and understood for the first time how Patricia had lived so long behind arguments like this one. Not because the arguments were true, but because they were built from pieces of things that sounded like they could be. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word thunder below. Then we continue the story. When he finished, Ashford stood. Then Ashford said, "Your Honor, the witness who signed that declaration is present and available for examination." Judge Miriam Calloway looked at Oliver Harrington over her reading glasses. Oliver stood when she looked at him. He did not need to be asked twice. Oliver took the stand the way he had probably taken 1,000 positions in rooms like this one, without performance, without deference, with the plain-spoken authority of a man who has nothing left to protect except the truth. He described sitting with Eleanor at his kitchen table on the afternoon she brought the codicil draft. He described the worn linoleum under their chairs, the afternoon light coming through the window over the sink, Eleanor's reading glasses on the end of her nose as she read through the language. He described the questions she had asked him about what the clause would mean if challenged. He said she had written 2 changes in the margin in her own hand. He could cite them from memory, and did. He said she had been afraid. He paused there. "She was afraid," he said, "but she was clear. I want the court to understand that distinction. There is a difference between fear and incompetence. Eleanor Voss Pemberton was afraid of what her daughter would do when she found out. That fear was reasonable and was, in fact, correct. But she was not confused. She was not coerced. She was a woman in possession of her own mind, making a choice about her own property, witnessed and notarized in full legal compliance. He looked at the judge. I served 22 years in this county as a circuit court judge. I know what legal capacity looks like. I was in that room. Eleanor had it. The attorney sat down. Judge Calloway read the physician's notes in silence for about 90 seconds. She was a small woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the particular stillness of someone who has made hard decisions in public for long enough that the decisions no longer rattle her physical body. She set the notes down. She looked at Patricia's attorney. Is there medical evidence from the same period contradicting the treating physician's capacity assessment at the time of the codicil's signing? She asked. Patricia's attorney said there was not from that period. Is there medical evidence from any other licensed physician who examined Ms. Voss Pemberton before the codicil was signed and found her to lack testamentary capacity? There was not. Judge Calloway said, motion denied. The codicil stands as a valid testamentary instrument. The court finds no grounds to invalidate it on the basis of capacity, bias, or undue influence. The forensic analysis is entered into the record. She set her glasses on the chain. Counsel, I'd encourage your client to consult with you carefully about the implications of what has been filed in conjunction with this matter in other venues. She did not look at Patricia when she said it. She did not need to. I heard Patricia's attorney lean in and say something close to her ear. I did not catch the words. I watched Patricia's face. Her expression did not shift. She was already recalculating. I knew that look. I had grown up with it at every dinner table, every school performance, every phone call where something didn't go the way she had arranged it. That face. Not loss. Adjustment. We walked out into the marble corridor. I stopped a few feet from the door and leaned against the wall. The wall was cool. I pressed my shoulder blades into it and breathed. My hands were trembling. Not much. Not visibly if you weren't looking, but I felt it. 11 weeks of holding still, and they chose now to shake. Oliver came and stood beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder for a moment, briefly, carefully, the way an older man offers steadiness without presumption, and then removed it. Eleanor would have liked today, he said. I couldn't speak. I nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. So will I said. There was a moment between us, between all three of us, where none of us said anything. The November air was cold. A slow drizzle had started somewhere over the river, and I could feel it on my face. Ashford put his reading glasses in his breast pocket. Oliver straightened his jacket collar. Go see Eleanor first, Oliver said, before the afternoon. He was right. He was almost always right about things like that. I drove back to Magnolia House alone. I stopped in the Magnolia House parking lot and sat in my car for a few minutes. I put my nursing badge back on, not because I was returning as a nurse, because I was returning to room 14, and the badge is the thing I wore when I was trying to take care of someone, and that was still what I was doing. The overnight nurse met me in the hallway. Eleanor had been in a deep sleep since early morning. Not unconscious. Her vitals were stable. Her breathing was quiet, but not lucid. The windows were closing faster now. I had known it was coming. I had known for 3 days. It is one thing to know something clinically and another thing to walk into room 14 and feel it in the air. I held Eleanor's hand and did not speak. I don't know if she knew I was there. I have to believe she did. I have to keep that, the possibility of it, because the alternative is a room where a woman died without knowing that someone had fought for her, and I am not willing to accept that room. The conference room at Magnolia House smelled of fluorescent lights and old coffee. 5 chairs around the oval table. I had arrived 20 minutes early and sat down and placed the codicil on the table in front of me and did not touch it again until it was time. Patricia arrived at 3:10 with her attorney. She had rebuilt herself since the courthouse. The composure was back. Not perfectly, not the full performance, but enough. Her gold necklace was in place. Her blazer was buttoned. She walked into the room, and she saw the 4 of us already seated, and something moved across her face. Not fear, not quite. And then she sat down across the table and put her leather portfolio in front of her and clasped her hands over it. Her attorney started to speak. He began to frame a statement about the morning's ruling and his client's continued cooperation with the APS process. He was managing. Patricia had hired someone good at managing. Ashford waited until the attorney had said 2 complete sentences and then held up one hand. "I have 3 items to enter before we proceed," Ashford said. He reached into his satchel and brought out the documents one at a time. He placed them on the table with the methodical care of a man who does not waste gestures. The first was the codicil, Eleanor's handwritten, witnessed, notarized document, the one Judge Calloway had upheld 2 hours ago in a courthouse 3 miles from where we were sitting. Patricia's attorney said, "We will need time to review." "I'm not finished," Ashford said. The attorney stopped. Reeves Sinclair opened the manila folder. She did not make a performance of it. She pulled out 2 pages, placed them on the table, and slid one toward Patricia's attorney without looking at him. She paused. Eleanor Voss Pemberton's personal checking account at the time of discovery contained $214. The APS investigator wrote both numbers on her legal pad. $620,000, $214. She pressed the pen down hard enough that I could hear the scratch of it. Patricia's attorney put his hand on Patricia's arm. He said quietly but audibly, "Do not speak." Patricia was looking at me. Her face was composed. Patricia's face was almost always composed. I had grown up watching that face compose itself in real time, at school meetings, at dinner parties, on the phone with people who had disappointed her. I knew every version of it. This version was the one she wore when she was still calculating, when the math was not yet resolved, when she was holding all the options in her mind like cards fanned in her hand and had not yet decided which to play. But the cards were gone. I could see the moment she understood that. Her hands went flat on the table. Her gold necklace was still. The warmth she wore like a second blazer, the practiced warmth, the warmth that was a tool, it was gone from her face. And what was underneath it was not guilt and was not grief. It was just a woman who had run a very long and very careful operation and who was looking at the person who had ended it and who could not find a single thing left to say. I picked up the codicil. I had read it to myself enough times that the words were part of my body by then. I had read it in Ashford's office and in my car in the courthouse parking lot and sitting in the chair beside Eleanor's bed at 2 in the morning. I had read it until it stopped being a legal document and became something else, the last thing Eleanor was able to give me when everything else had been taken. I did not look at Patricia. I looked at the paper. "To my granddaughter Rachel," I read, "whom I was not permitted to love openly, I leave everything that remains mine to give, the house on Gaston Street, and whatever the law sees fit to return to me before I go. I have read about your life in the newspaper for 11 years. I am proud of who you have become without me. I am sorry I could not find a way to you sooner." The room was absolutely quiet. I set the codicil down on the table. Patricia said nothing. She said nothing for the first time in my memory. Not the calculated silence of someone with a strategy, but the silence of someone who has run out of language. Her attorney was already leaning in, already beginning the process of managed retreat. Patricia's hands were flat on the table. Her gold necklace caught the fluorescent overhead. Patricia's attorney said they would comply under protest. It was a formality. He knew it. Everyone at that table knew it. Patricia stood. Her chair scraped the linoleum floor. A flat, functional sound. Nothing cinematic about it. She did not look at me again. She walked to the door with her attorney behind her, and the door swung shut, and she was gone. I sat very still. The APS investigator closed her legal pad. She capped her pen. She looked across the table at me and said, "I've been doing this for 14 years. A pause. This one was thorough. The codicil, the property records, the physician's notes, the bank account. What you found, that's what made this possible." Reeves Sinclair was already standing, already clipping her badge holder back to her belt. She said, "The DA will be in touch." She picked up the manila folder, tucked it under her arm, and walked out the door. She didn't say goodbye. That was exactly right. There was no goodbye appropriate to this. Ashford took his reading glasses off the table and held them in his hand. He looked at me. He said, "It's not over. The civil judgment takes time. The criminal case takes time. Patricia will have representation at every stage, and she will use every stage." He paused. "But the worst of it is," I nodded. I didn't feel victorious. I did not feel the clean resolution of having solved something. I felt the way I imagine a shoreline feels the morning after a storm has moved through it, scoured and exposed and impossibly tired, with the tide still doing whatever the tide does regardless. "Go be with her," Ashford said. I went back to room 14. Eleanor died 11 days after the conference room confrontation. She died in the early hours of a Thursday morning in the last week of November, with the thin gray light just beginning to show at the edge of the frosted window. I was in the chair beside her bed. I had come in at midnight and had not left. The oxygen monitor registered the change before I did. A sound. A long, steady tone that means something definitive. I stood and I looked at Eleanor's face. Her hands were folded on the blanket. The oxygen cannula was in place. She looked the way people sometimes look at the very end, when the effort of being in a body has finally been set aside, like someone who has waited a long time for something and has finally been allowed to stop waiting. After a while, I reached over and picked up the photograph. I put it in my bag, not as evidence. The evidence was already filed, already frozen, already in the hands of people whose job was to carry it forward. I took it because it is one of the only photographs anyone has of Eleanor looking happy. That counted for something. It will always count for something. I signed the forms. I briefed the charge nurse. I did all the things that needed doing in the careful order they needed doing, because I had been a hospice nurse for 12 years, and I knew how to hold the professional self together even when everything else was not. Then I drove to 412 Gaston Street, but I had been going to Gaston Street since November. I had a key. Ashford had arranged a temporary stewardship agreement through the estate while the civil case moved forward, and I had been going there on my days off, unlocking the front door, walking through the rooms. The house needed work. It needed more work than I had money to do quickly. The overgrown garden climbed the fence like it had decided the fence was a suggestion. The kitchen had a cracked windowsill and a back door that stuck in the frame and floorboards in the second hallway that needed replacing. I had been taking notes. Not renovation plans exactly, something else, a list of what the rooms could become. The afternoon the civil judgment came through, I drove to Gaston Street and parked in front. I sat in the car for a moment looking at the house. Antebellum bones, 2 stories of pale brick, the porch with its worn boards and its iron railing. Eleanor had stood on that porch holding infant Rachel in a photograph that was now in my kitchen drawer. I got out of the car. I walked to the mailbox at the end of the front path. There was a letter in it, addressed to Eleanor Voss Pemberton, redirected from Magnolia House after the forged forwarding instruction had been canceled and the mail rerouted. It had been there for a while. The envelope was a little soft at the corners from the weather. I took it off the porch and looked at it. The return address was a legal services organization in Atlanta, probably something related to the estate. I didn't open it. I held it. The afternoon was cold and still. The garden behind the iron fence was brown and overgrown. A cardinal moved in the bare branches of the pecan tree in the back corner. The porch boards were solid under my feet. The way things built to last are solid. You can feel it when you stand on them. The front door was behind me, unlocked. The rooms inside were waiting. Eleanor had left me everything that remained hers to give. She had written that in her own handwriting. On a codicil she signed at Oliver Harrington's kitchen table, on an afternoon when she was afraid and clear and deliberate, and she had pressed the pen down hard enough that the words were still sharp and dark when I read them in a fluorescent-lit conference room with my mother sitting across the table in silence. Some debts of love cannot be fully paid. Eleanor knew that. She wrote it into the codicil, not in those words, but in the particular way she chose to say goodbye. "I am proud of who you have become without me," she had written, "and I am sorry I could not find a way to you sooner." She was not asking me to balance the account. She was handing me what she could reach with both hands in the time she had left. I tucked the letter under my arm. I put my hand on the iron railing. The cold metal was steady under my palm. And I stood there on Eleanor's porch and looked out at Gaston Street and held everything she had given me, knowing it was not enough, knowing it was all there was, and knowing, because 12 years of sitting beside dying people had taught me this, if nothing else, that honoring what you have been given is not the same as forgiving what was taken, and that both things can be true at once, and that the only thing left to do was to walk back through that door and begin. 4 months after Eleanor Voss Pemberton died in room 14 of Magnolia House Hospice, Chatham County filed the charge. I wasn't in the courthouse when it happened. I was on shift. I heard about it the way I hear most things now, a text from James Ashford that read, "Filed this morning. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Georgia statute. Wire fraud count attached. She's been served." I read it standing in the supply room, holding a box of gauze pads. I set the box down on the shelf. I read it again. Then I went back to work. I want to be honest with you about what that moment felt like, because people always expect it to feel a certain way. They expect fireworks or relief or the sensation of a weightlifting. What I felt was something quieter and more precise. I felt accurate. The thing that had happened was now the thing the record said had happened. That was all. And that was enough to keep standing. The criminal case moved the way James Ashford told me it would. Slowly, then all at once. Patricia's attorney tried 3 motions in the first 2 months. They were all denied. The backdated power of attorney was the clean predicate James had said it was from the beginning. When your own notary's stamp predates the diagnosis by 11 days, there is no argument left to make. The notary, Bernard Slade, had his commission revoked by the Georgia Superior Court Clerk's Cooperative Authority 6 weeks after the charge was filed. His name went into the public record. I did not feel satisfaction reading it. I felt the system recognizing itself, the slow machinery identifying the place where it had been used as a weapon and finally recording the wound. Bernard Slade. The name is in the record now. That matters even if no one reads it. 11 months after Eleanor died, Patricia Voss Callahan entered a guilty plea before Judge Caldwell at Chatham County Courthouse. I sat in the 3rd row. James Ashford was beside me. Oliver Harrington was 1 row back, wearing a dark tie, his hands folded over his knees. Detective Gwendolyn Reeves Sinclair stood near the side wall, her worn badge holder clipped to her belt the same way it had been clipped the morning of the conference room. Patricia walked in with her attorney. She was wearing a gray blazer, no gold necklace. I noticed that. The absence of it. She looked smaller without it, or maybe she just looked like what she actually was. A 62-year-old woman who had made a series of deliberate choices over many years and was standing in front of a judge to answer for them. Judge Caldwell read the plea terms into the record. 1 count of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Georgia law. 1 count of wire fraud, federal predicate, related to LLC to LLC transfer of funds through a Charleston clearing institution. Defendant enters a guilty plea. Court accepts the plea. Sentence 5 years probation. Defendant is permanently barred by court order from holding any financial power of attorney in the state of Georgia. Patricia said, I understand. When the judge asked if she understood the terms, that was the only thing she said. I had spent 11 months bracing for the moment she would look at me. She didn't. Not once. Not when she walked in. Not when the judge read the charge. Not when the clerk stamped the documents. Not when she walked out. I was her daughter. I had been standing 40 feet away. I was still, to her, the wrong category of person to look at. James put his hand on my arm briefly when we stood to leave. Oliver Harrington caught my eye in the corridor and nodded once, the way a judge nods when a verdict is the correct one. Detective Reeves Sinclair was already on her phone, walking toward the exit. The work, for her, had been done months ago. Outside the courthouse, on the marble steps, I stood in the October air and thought about Eleanor. She died on a Tuesday. 11 days after the conference room. I had been with her through the night shift, sitting in the chair beside her bed, my lanyard ID badge tucked inside my scrub pocket so it didn't catch the light and wake her. Her oxygen cannula was in place. The monitors were quiet. At 4:47 in the morning, her breathing changed. It slowed, and then it stopped. There was no distress. There was no struggle. There was just the room, and the frosted glass, and the thin gray light beginning in the east. And Eleanor. I held her hand until it was time to call the charge nurse. I want to say I told her everything before she went. The truth is, I think she already knew. She had planned for 11 years for someone to find out. She had written 11 letters and put them in a cardboard box and trusted a neighbor to hold them until the right someone came looking. She had positioned herself in a hospice that employed her granddaughter, and then she had waited. Eleanor Voss Pemberton was 81 years old, and she had used the last tools available to her: patience, paper, a retired judge's sense of honor, and an oxygen cannula on a lanyard across her cheekbones, to do the thing she could not do openly. She had left me a light on. I am still not entirely sure I deserved it. I am certain I intend to honor it. The Savannah Morning News ran a short item on the plea, 6 paragraphs. Patricia's name, the charge, the amount, $620,000. Voss Callahan Properties, LLC, Voss Coastal Holdings, 5 years probation. I read it in my car, parked on Gaston Street, the engine running. There was no vindication in it. There was only accuracy. The story as printed was accurate. That was what I had wanted. Not for people to know what I knew, but for the record to exist. For Eleanor's name to be next to the word victim in a legal document in a public filing in Chatham County, Georgia, so that no one could ever again edit her out of her own story. Patricia's real estate broker license was suspended by the Georgia Secretary of State's licensing division 2 weeks after the plea. Pending review. James said the review would not go in her favor, given the fraud predicate. I did not call anyone to confirm. The suspension was enough. She had used her professional credentials and her institutional authority as a weapon against an 81-year-old woman with $214 left in her checking account. The system eventually recorded that. 8 months after Eleanor's death, 3 months before the criminal plea, the civil judgment came through. The $1 transfer of 412 Gaston Street, Savannah, Georgia, to Voss Callahan Properties, LLC was unwound. The court ruled the transfer fraudulent. The property was returned to Eleanor's estate. And because the codicil had been validated, because Oliver Harrington's signed judicial declaration and Eleanor's physician's notes from 18 months prior had established testamentary capacity beyond what Patricia's attorney could dispute, the estate passed to me. I received a deed in the mail. It came in a standard manila envelope, the kind James Ashford uses. Inside, 2 pages, county seal my name, Rachel Voss Whitaker, sole heir, 412 Gaston Street, Savannah, Georgia. I held it for a long time without putting it down. The paper had a specific weight to it, and a slight smell, the way formal documents smell, a little like dust and something chemical underneath. My hands didn't shake. My eyes did. I didn't think about what the house meant. Not yet. I just held the deed the same way I had held Eleanor's hand in the dark, carefully, because the thing in my hands was the last physical evidence that she had existed and chosen and tried to love me across an impossible distance. Oliver Harrington was at the house the first day I unlocked it. He was standing on the front walkway when I pulled up, wearing a canvas jacket, his hands in his pockets. He didn't explain why he'd come. I didn't ask. Some things don't need explaining. The front door lock was stiff. He held the frame while I worked the key. Eleanor asked me once, Oliver said, watching me try the lock, what I thought she should do with this house. What did you tell her? I told her it should be lived in. He paused. She said that was exactly what she was planning. The lock gave. The door opened onto a dim front hall, the smell of old wood and closed air and something faintly floral underneath, like dried sachets. I walked through the rooms. Oliver stayed in the doorway of each one, giving me space. The wallpaper in the front parlor was old, pale yellow, a small repeating vine, and it had pulled away at one corner near the window. The floors were good, heart of pine, still solid underfoot, just dusty. The kitchen was small and intact. There was a teacup in the drying rack beside the sink, left there from before Eleanor went into hospice 18 months ago, waiting. The garden had gone back to itself. The boxwoods were overgrown and the brick path was broken in 2 places, but the bones were there, the structure, the shape of what it had been. I stood at the back window and looked at it for a long time. She tended it herself, Oliver said from behind me. Right up until the spring she went in. The neighbors used to see her out here in the mornings. I turned around. Oliver, my voice came out quieter than I expected. How long did you know? Before I found you? He looked at the window instead of at me. Long enough that I am ashamed of it. His jaw tightened. I told myself she had a plan, that it wasn't my place to interfere. He turned back. It was my place. I just didn't find the courage until she asked me to hold that box. I didn't tell him it was all right. It wasn't all right, but it also wasn't mine to forgive or not forgive on Eleanor's behalf. He had held the box. He had submitted the declaration. He had stood in a courtroom and nodded at a verdict. That was the thing he had to live with, and the thing he had also eventually done right. She was lucky to have a neighbor who held the box, I said. That was the honest truth of it. He nodded once. He looked for a moment like a man who was setting something down. The $620,000 Tybee Island proceeds moved slowly through restitution. James Ashford explained the mechanism. The funds, frozen in the Voss Coastal Holdings shell account, were subject to the restitution order embedded in Patricia's plea agreement. The money would be returned to Eleanor's estate. From the estate, under the validated codicil, it would pass to me as sole heir. He said it would take several months for the account to clear the state's restitution process. It took 4 months and 11 days. When the check cleared, I sat in my car in the parking lot of First National Bank on Bull Street, and I looked at the balance on my phone. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word ocean below. Then we continue the story. I had not let myself think about it until that moment. It felt important not to think about it, not to plan for money I hadn't yet received, money that had been extracted from an old woman $1 at a time until she had $214 left and her mail was being forwarded to her daughter's brokerage office. I looked at the balance. I thought about Eleanor's teacup in the drying rack, and then I knew exactly what to do. The Gaston Street Patient Advocacy Center opened 1 year after Eleanor's death. 412 Gaston Street, Savannah, Georgia. The center serves hospice patients who have no trusted next of kin, patients whose family members hold power of attorney or claim to hold it without proper oversight. We have 3 volunteer attorneys on retainer who review power of attorney documents for backdating and irregularity. We have 2 social workers trained in financial abuse recognition. We have advocates who will sit with a patient during a family meeting, take notes, ask questions, and make sure that what gets decided in those rooms is what the patient actually wants, not what is convenient for whoever controls the paperwork. I want to be clear about something. I did not build this because I wanted to. I built it because I know how to read an intake form, and I know what it looks like when someone has been erased from their own next of kin line, and I cannot unknow that. The knowledge sits in my body the same way 11 years of hospice nursing sits there. Not as a burden, exactly, but as a weight I carry because I am built to carry it, and because someone has to. The first month, we served 4 patients. The second month, 7. I don't tell you this as a triumph. I tell you this as a fact, the way I would document it in a chart. Date, action, outcome, 4 patients, 7 patients. The number is not the point. The point is that every one of those patients had someone sitting with them who was not going to let an intake form say, no next of kin, when next of kin existed and was being kept away on purpose. James Ashford is on our board of directors. Oliver Harrington is on our advisory committee. He comes in on Wednesday mornings and answers questions from the volunteer attorneys about evidentiary standards for testamentary capacity. Detective Gwendolyn Reeves Sinclair sent us a referral in our second month. A patient at a different facility, a different family, a similar pattern. The same stiff posture of financial authority being used as a cover for extraction. The same $1 transfer waiting somewhere in the county records. The work is not glamorous. The work is paperwork and phone calls and sitting in rooms with people who are dying and making sure their voices stay in the record. It is exactly the work I have always done. I am just doing it now at a different scale and with a better understanding of why it matters. I read the last of Eleanor's 11 letters on the first anniversary of her death. I had been unable to read it before then. The other 10 letters I had read slowly over the months, one at a time with space between them, the way you eat a meal when you are very hungry and know you have to be careful. But the last one, the one dated the spring before Eleanor went into hospice, I had kept in the cardboard box in its envelope, sealed. I sat on the front porch of the Gaston Street house at dusk. The October air was cool and smelled of the garden, which I had been clearing slowly on weekends. The boxwoods cut back. The brick path still broken in 2 places, but the path visible again. I opened the envelope. Eleanor's handwriting was smaller in this letter than in the early ones. Careful. The handwriting of someone who knows that words cost effort and means to spend them precisely. She wrote, I have tried to imagine what I would say if you were sitting across from me. I have written this letter 12 times and burned 11 of them because none of them were honest enough. Here is what is honest. I don't expect you to come. I am an old woman who has made my choices and lived inside the consequences of them, and I have no right to expect anything. But I want you to know. I want you to know in case it matters, in case it ever helps anything. The porch light will be on. It is on a timer. It will come on at dusk every evening whether I am here or not. That is the most I can do. I hope it is enough. She had signed it. With love that was never retracted, Eleanor. I folded the letter. The porch light came on. It is on a timer the way she wrote. It comes on at dusk every evening, right on schedule, the warm yellow of it falling across the overgrown garden and the broken brick path and the old painted boards of the porch where I was sitting. I didn't go inside yet. I sat there with the letter folded in my lap, and I looked at the light, and I thought about what it means to keep a light on for someone who might not come, the specific kind of faith that requires. Not the faith that the person will arrive, just the faith that the light is worth keeping on anyway, that the gesture itself means something, independent of whether it is ever witnessed. Eleanor had kept the light on for 11 years, through forged mail forwarding and intercepted letters and a granddaughter who didn't know she existed. She had kept the light on until the porch light was on a timer, and she was in a hospice bed in room 14 with an oxygen cannula across her cheekbones, and even then she had found a way to send the light forward. 11 letters in a cardboard box, a notarized codicil, a neighbor with enough honor left in him to hold the box until someone came. Some debts of love cannot be fully paid, but they can be honored. You can stand on the porch and hold the letter and let the light fall on you, and you can stay there in it, and that is the honoring. I didn't inherit a house. I inherited 11 years of letters and 11 days, and a woman who kept a light on for someone she wasn't sure would ever find her way back. I am still finding my way back. That's the only honest thing I can tell you. I'm Rachel Voss Whitaker, hospice nurse, granddaughter, heir to 11 letters and one house I will never sell. The Gaston Street Patient Advocacy Center opened on a Tuesday. Not a Friday, not a weekend when the light would have been better for photographs. A Tuesday because that is when the permits cleared, and that is when James Ashford called to say the civil judgment was fully recorded and the deed was in Eleanor's estate, and therefore in mine. And I didn't want to wait another day. Oliver Harrington came. He wore the same jacket and tie he had worn to the courthouse. He brought a small pot of rosemary from his kitchen windowsill and set it on the porch railing without explanation, and I understood that it was his version of the gesture, something living, placed where it could be seen. James Ashford came, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a single manila folder under his arm out of what I think was professional habit. He stood at the edge of the overgrown garden and looked at the front of the house for a long moment before he said anything. What he finally said was, Eleanor would have called this adequate. That was, I have come to understand, the highest praise James Ashford has in his vocabulary. There was no ribbon cutting. There was no photograph in the Savannah Morning News, though a reporter had asked. I wasn't ready for that. Maybe I will never be ready for that. What there was, a key in my hand, a front door that needed 2 tries to open because the lock is old and the frame has settled, and then the smell of a house that has been waiting. The first patient advocacy consultation happened 9 days later. A woman, 64 years old, no local family, admitted to a different facility across town, had no one to sit with her during a care conference. Her social worker had found us through a notice James filed with the Chatham County Probate Court attached to the settlement. The notice was 2 sentences. It was enough. I drove across town in my car with the laminated badge on its lanyard and a notepad and a pen, and I sat beside her at the table, and I watched the facility staff explain a care plan she didn't fully understand, and I asked the questions she didn't know she was allowed to ask. It took 2 hours. When it was over, she held my hand for a moment in the parking lot and then let go without saying anything. I drove back to Gaston Street. I sat on the porch. I am still, most evenings, sitting on that porch. The light comes on at dusk, the warm yellow of it, exactly the way Eleanor set the timer. I haven't changed the setting. I don't intend to. Patricia Voss Callahan is completing her 5th month of probation. She is barred from holding power of attorney in the state of Georgia. The notary Bernard Slade surrendered his commission before the licensing board could revoke it. The $620,000 in Tybee Island proceeds remains frozen pending the final restitution order. She has not contacted me. I do not expect her to. I am not at peace. I want to be honest about that. Peace implies a kind of settled closure that I do not feel. What I feel is something more like orientation, the sense of knowing which direction I am facing, even when I cannot see very far ahead. Eleanor felt that, I think. She kept the porch light on a timer and wrote 11 letters to a granddaughter she had never been permitted to openly love, and she called it the most she could do, and she hoped it was enough. It was enough. I am still a hospice nurse. I still carry the badge on the lanyard. I still walk into rooms where people are dying, and I do the work of making that fact as bearable as it can be made. I do it differently now, with a particular attention to the intake folder, to the next of kin field, to the name that is not listed there, to the person who should have been called but wasn't. If you have someone in your life, elderly, alone, a field left blank on a form, I want you to ask one question, not the question that is convenient, the question that is true. Eleanor asked it too late, but she asked it. She wrote it 11 times in 11 letters and put it in a cardboard box and trusted a neighbor to hold it. That is the most any of us can do. And yet the work is not finished with sitting on porches and carrying badges. Let me tell you what I did not expect, that the hardest part would come after the guilty plea, after the civil judgment, after the property deed was recorded in Eleanor's estate and then transferred, by court order, into mine. The hardest part was the morning I stood at the front door of 412 Gaston Street with a contractor's estimate in one hand and Eleanor's final letter in the other, and I had to decide what kind of thing the house would become. I had thought about selling it. I want to be honest about that. The thought lasted exactly one afternoon. Then I went back to work. I walked into room 14, a different patient, different name on the folder, different face turned toward the frosted glass, and the intake form had the next of kin field blank. Again, a different name, the same blank. I drove to Gaston Street that evening, and I did not go inside. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at the antebellum bones of the place, the overgrown garden, the porch light Eleanor had put on a timer so the house would never look entirely abandoned. And I understood what it was supposed to be. James Ashford handled the non-profit filings. He did it at a reduced rate, and he did not make a point of saying so. He pushed his reading glasses up on his forehead in the same habitual way and told me the application would take several months and that I should be patient. I told him patience was not my strongest quality. He said he had noticed. Oliver Harrington came to the ribbon cutting. He wore the same jacket and tie he had worn to the courthouse. He stood on the porch and looked at the new sign, small, bronze, fixed to the brick beside the door, and I watched him read it twice. He did not say much. He is not, in the end, a man of many words when the words that need saying are already present in the space around him. He put his hand briefly on the door frame, the way you might touch something to confirm it is real, and then he stepped inside. The Gaston Street Patient Advocacy Center opened 11 months after Eleanor died. It serves hospice patients in Chatham County who have no verified next of kin listed in their intake documentation. It provides advocates, volunteers, most of them, trained by James Ashford's office and by the APS unit that Gwendolyn Reeves Sinclair coordinates with, who do exactly what I did not know I was doing when I first picked up Eleanor's intake folder. They ask the question that is true, not the question that is convenient. We have identified in the first year 41 patients across 4 Savannah hospice facilities whose next of kin fields were blank or listed incorrectly. Some of those blanks were innocent, estrangement, geography, the ordinary entropy of long lives. Some of them were not. 3 cases have been referred to APS. 1 has been referred to Reeves Sinclair's unit directly. I think about Eleanor in those rooms. I think about the 11 letters she wrote and the 11 days I had with her and the questions she managed to ask, in the end, even if the asking came in handwriting on paper inside a cardboard box on a neighbor's kitchen table. She could not say it to my face. She did not have that time, but she said it. She wrote it 11 times in 11 different ways, and every version of it came back to the same sentence. I should have found you sooner. I am sorry. You were always mine to love. I keep the last letter on Eleanor's writing desk, which is now in the room we use as the center's intake office. I did not frame it. Framing it felt like declaring it finished. It is not finished. It is the thing we are still in the middle of. The porch light comes on at dusk. I have not changed the timer. I do not intend to. Some mornings I arrive before anyone else. I let myself in through the side door, the one that still has Eleanor's original lock, a deadbolt so old the key has to be lifted slightly to turn, and I stand in the front hallway for a moment before I do anything else. The floorboards are original heart pine. They creak in the same places they always did. I know that because Eleanor told me, in one of the letters, that she used to listen for the particular sound of that third board from the landing when she was a girl, waiting to hear whether her father was coming upstairs in a good mood or a bad one. I learned the geography of this house through her handwriting before I ever walked its rooms. I think about that sometimes. How much of what I know about this place arrived in paper and ink, posthumously, from a woman I had 11 days with in a hospice room. How the house was already mine, in some interior sense, before I had any legal claim to it. Before James Ashford had filed a single document. Before Gwendolyn Reeves Sinclair had frozen a single account, Patricia understood that the house was the center of it. That was why the $1 transfer happened in 2017, 2 years before Eleanor's condition made the predation visible. She was not acting out of desperation. She was acting out of patience. She She had looked at the house on Gaston Street and understood exactly what it represented. Not just the appraised value, not just the equity, but the weight of it, the thing it would mean for someone else to have it. She transferred it for $1 because she knew that price contained a message. This is worth nothing. She is worth nothing. You will never know what you lost. She was wrong about that last part. James Ashford still calls on the first Tuesday of every month. Not about Patricia. Her probation terms are Reeves Sinclair's operational concern now, and the Georgia Notary Licensing Board handled Bernard Slade separately, without my involvement. James calls because we are building something, and building things requires a lawyer who asks the inconvenient question before it becomes the catastrophic one. He has pro bono hours allocated to the center through his firm. He negotiated that himself. I did not ask him to. He sat across from me in his office, reading glasses on his forehead, case files stacked behind him, the live oak canopy visible through the single window, and told me that Eleanor's case had changed the way he thought about certain intake procedures. He said it quietly and did not elaborate, and I did not press him. Some things do not need to be pressed. Oliver Harrington attends the monthly volunteer meetings. He sits in the back. He does not chair, does not lecture. He spent enough decades behind a bench to understand the particular damage that authority can do to a room that needs to breathe. But he answers questions when volunteers ask them, and his answers are exact and patient and free of the self-importance that could so easily accompany 22 years on the bench in Chatham County. He told me once, walking back down the porch steps after a meeting, that Eleanor had made him promise not to act until the right person appeared. He had not understood, when she said it, that she was describing someone she already knew, someone she had been watching, at a distance, through newspaper clippings for 11 years. I still do not entirely know what to do with that Eleanor saw me before I saw her, that the cardboard box on Oliver's kitchen table was not a contingency. It was a specific bequest, aimed at a specific person, constructed in the full knowledge that Patricia would try to make it disappear. Eleanor was not confused at the end. She was outmaneuvered. Those are not the same thing. The intake folder from room 14 is in my desk drawer. I kept it. I should not have. Technically, it belongs to Magnolia House's records, but no one has asked for it, and I find I am not ready to let it go. The line that stopped me the first time still stops me. Next of kin. None known. I look at it some mornings and I think, she was known. She was always known. The paperwork simply had not caught up to the truth yet. That is the work. That is what we do here. We make the paperwork catch up to the truth before it is too late to matter. The porch light comes on at dusk. I have not changed the timer, and every evening when I lock the side door and hear that old deadbolt turn, I lift the key slightly, the way Eleanor said you had to, so the latch would catch cleanly. She showed me that once, in the 11 days we had. She said the door had always been particular. I did not understand at the time that she was passing something to me. That is the nature of inheritance, I think. You rarely recognize it in the moment of receiving. You only understand it later, when you are standing at the door alone, doing the thing you were taught to do, and you realize that someone you loved is in the gesture. The Gaston Street Patient Advocacy Center opened on a Thursday. Not a Monday, not a ribbon-cutting Saturday designed for maximum attendance. A Thursday, because Thursdays were the days Eleanor had told me she used to walk the garden before the garden went untended. I do not know if that is a meaningful reason or a sentimental one. I have stopped trying to sort those categories cleanly. James Ashford came. He stood on the porch with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the same position they were in on the day we walked into Chatham County Courthouse together, and he looked at the restored front door and said, Eleanor would have had opinions about that paint color. I told him she would have been right. He smiled at that, which is not something James Ashford does frequently or carelessly. Oliver Harrington came. He brought nothing. He stood in the front hallway for a long moment and looked at the framed photograph on the wall. Eleanor's photograph, the unedited version, not the cropped one from my mother's mantelpiece, and he did not say anything for a while. When he did speak, he said, "She got it right." He meant Eleanor. He meant the box, the letters, the codicil. He meant the whole long, patient architecture of what Eleanor had built in the years she spent watching from a distance. I agreed. She had gotten it right. Gwendolyn Reeves Sinclair sent a card, typed, not handwritten. She is not a handwritten card person, which I respect. And it said, "Good use of a complicated situation. GRS." I put it on the desk in the front office, which used to be Eleanor's sitting room. Patricia Voss Callahan did not come. She is completing the terms of her probation in Savannah, 5 years, barred from holding power of attorney in Georgia. Her real estate license is under review by the Georgia Real Estate Commission. The notary, Bernard Slade, surrendered his commission and is no longer practicing. None of that restored the $620,000. Most of it was recovered through the civil judgment. Frozen, clawed back through the LLC Patricia had opened under her maiden name, the one Detective Reeves Sinclair found in records Patricia had believed were untraceable. Most is not all. The accounting of what was lost does not close neatly. Eleanor's personal account had $214 in it on the day I found those records. $214. I carry that number the way you carry a scar. Not always visible, not always painful, but always present under the surface, testifying to something that happened and cannot be entirely undone. The center serves hospice patients who have no trusted next of kin. Patients whose intake folders say what Eleanor's said. Next of kin, none known. We do not change that line. We find the person the line was wrong about, and we make the paperwork catch up before the window closes. That is the whole of it. That is everything the 11 days in room 14 taught me, that the window closes, and the only question is whether you act before it does. I still wear the lanyard at Magnolia House on the days I go back to consult, the laminated badge with my name and my credentials, slightly worn at the corners now. Rachel Voss Whitaker. It grounds me. It reminds me who I was walking into room 14 that October morning, a nurse with a manila folder and a professional obligation, before I understood what I was also walking into. I think about Eleanor's 11 letters often, not all at once, not in order always. I think about the third one on Tuesday mornings, for reasons I cannot entirely explain. Something about the light in the front office at that hour, the way it comes through the old wavy glass of the Gaston Street windows and makes the room feel both very old and very present. Eleanor wrote that one in February, about 14 months before she came to Magnolia House. Her handwriting was still, even then, controlled. She described the garden at 412 Gaston Street in winter, the overgrown camellias, the iron fence that needed painting, the way the house looked in the early morning when she was the only one awake. She wrote, "I have kept this for you as long as I was able. I do not know how much longer I can keep it." She knew. She knew what Patricia was doing, and she knew she did not have the strength to stop it alone, and she wrote the letters anyway, 11 of them, placed them in a cardboard box, carried them to Oliver Harrington's kitchen and asked him to wait. That is not passivity. I want to be clear about that. I have heard people say when I tell this story that Eleanor should have acted sooner, filed a complaint, called an attorney herself, and I understand the instinct behind that, the need to find the place where things could have gone differently, the hinge point where someone might have changed the outcome. But Eleanor was 81 years old. Her account held $214. Her house had been signed away for $1. Her mail was being intercepted. The person who controlled her access to the outside world was the same person stealing from her. She found the one thing Patricia could not intercept, and she used it. She found me. James Ashford still calls on the first Tuesday of the month. Brief calls, 5 minutes, sometimes 10. He updates me on anything that moves in the civil recovery, on the Real Estate Commission review of Patricia's license, on the occasional question that comes through the Georgia Bar referral channel about Bernard Slade. The calls are not warm, exactly. Ashford is not a warm call person, but they are consistent, and in the year since Eleanor died, consistency has come to feel like its own form of care. Oliver Harrington comes by the center on Saturday mornings. He brings coffee, the same gas station brand he brought the afternoon he placed that cardboard box on the table between us, and he sits in the front office for an hour, sometimes 2, and answers questions from the volunteers about hospice patient rights, about elder law, about what a retired judge actually knows that might be useful to someone trying to navigate a system that was not built with vulnerable people in mind. He is trying to pay something back. I told him once that he does not owe a debt. He said, "You are wrong about that." I decided to let him be right. The front porch still needs painting. I have made peace with the fact that it will always need painting. That a house this old, this close to the salt air coming off the Georgia coast will always be in the middle of becoming something rather than finished. I have stopped reading that as failure. It is just the nature of the material. On the evening the center opened, October, 1 year after I first walked into room 14, I stood on that porch with Eleanor's final letter in my hand, not reading it. I had read it enough times that I could have recited it. I was just holding it. The dusk was coming in off Gaston Street, the live oaks going dark at the edges, the air carrying that particular Savannah warmth that lingers even after the light is gone. Eleanor ended her last letter the same way she ended all 11. Not with goodbye, not with an instruction or a plea. She wrote, "You were always mine to find." I folded the letter back along its original creases and put it in my coat pocket. I went back inside. There was work to do. There is always work to do. That is the whole of it. That is what remains. Before I tell you how Patricia Voss Callahan walked into that conference room thinking she had won and walked out in handcuffs, tell me in the comments, have you ever looked at someone you loved and realized you were the last to know the truth? Subscribe, because what happened next in room 14 will change the way you think about family.